morning, good afternoon. We are really around the world, and this is amazing. I am grateful to the internet. But first of all, my name is Dr. Tova Goldfein. This is TMS Roundtable. I'd like to take a moment before I introduce my very, very wonderful friend and professional partner and co-host. I'd like to say that Rose and I are clinicians for lots of years. You can see it in our hairdressing, lots of years. We're not just two old grandmothers. We are clinicians working in this field. And each week for close to 3 years, we've brought amazing guests, as in tonight and today, another amazing guest. But we're helping people recover and heal from chronic pain and autoimmune disease. And we're inspiring, educating continually throughout the week on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. And I'm just really, really blessed to be here. I'm Tova. I'm chiming in from Israel. And Rose, good morning from Australia.
Good morning, Tova. Good morning. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have got Dr. Melissa Farmer with us today. Now, we are so lucky to actually have found Melissa, or Melissa found us. I'm not quite sure which way it went.
She found us.
Melissa is a psychologist, but she also has a neuroscientist background as well. So she's got the science and she's got the psychology. So she's got the feelings, the emotions, and she's got the reasons why those things happen. Now, when I was doing a little background looking at Melissa's story, I also found this lovely quote, and I'd like to mention it to you all because it's something that many of you fought with and against or whatever. And that is, pain is called a primary enforcer, a primary enforcer. In other words, you're going to go there. That's your policeman at your door, taking you away in handcuffs. It becomes a negative response to pain. The response to the okay, and within that, see, I can't read my shorthand. Within that comes fear. The enforcer comes in, so fear comes up, and this is one of the primary things that people with somatic pain feel. Now, from an ISTDP perspective, I would also be saying that with that fear comes mixed feelings about a person's life, about their relationships, about their self-esteem. But that's enough about that. We want to hear from Melissa, the person who knows about this. So thank you so much. Now, Melissa comes from Texas.
Uh-huh.
So yes, well, I've been all around.
Lone Star State, is that right?
Yes. I was born in Texas. I went to school up in Montreal at McGill, and then I did some postgraduate training in Chicago. And it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Tova. Thank you so much, Rose. I love to find opportunities like this to communicate what I know and to share what I know so that we can all be empowered. We can all share this common base of knowledge. And what Dr. Rose brought up was perfect. Well, what Rose brought up is perfect in that, a perfect segue, in that pain is a primary reinforcer. We don't need to do anything for there to be fear in pain. It's always partially sensory and partially emotional, always.
Wow.
Even in the chronic state. And there's a reason for this. It's because it's a fear signal that helps us learn to pay attention, to orient ourselves to what is causing the pain so that we're going to remember better in the future what things led up to that painful event so we can avoid it. So it's always the reason why that fear is important is because it helps with the emotional learning of the context that surrounds what caused the pain, because that's very important. Our brains are very interested in learning how to predict pain and to prevent pain.
I just want to give a quick example because this is what the community also uses this example. So we put our hand on the fire and we learn that it's hot, and that's a learned. So that's what you're saying. So it's learned, and the fear came and it protected me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just the way you explained it, just plugged in that, because you did it very well without even really being part of the community of the PPD. Anyway, it's just fascinating. I'm really interested to hear more.
And that's also, and that's the perfect example. But, this also extends to the movements that we know always hurt. For instance, if there are things this is why we learn to avoid movements that naturally hurt. It's part of how our brains naturally orient toward something called fear learning and emotional learning. And some of the science that I'd like to talk about is really, it sort of validated the importance of emotional learning in the transition to chronic pain and the maintenance of chronic pain over time. In that, whenever we encounter something that's painful over and over and over again, our brains create pathways to make sure we remember very well what led to that pain, what continues to perpetuate that pain, because it's concerned with, that's a very important memory trace. And so what we've seen in brain imaging studies using functional magnetic resonance imaging, which is it gives sort of moment by moment pictures of where activity is in the brain. It's helped us understand over time that people's brain, whenever you begin, for instance, with pain just for 2 to 3 months, you still have a sensory and emotional signature. Over time shifts into a mostly emotional brain signature. So this work was done by someone I worked with, Dr. Vanya Apkarian at Northwestern University. It was published in Nature Neuroscience, so very high tier journal article, or journal. But it's also validating what, for instance, Sarno has been discussing for years, and what this community discusses is a fact. So there's very hard science to support these ideas that there's an emotional suffering component to pain. And that's really how I think about it. The emotional learning part, it becomes the suffering of chronic pain. And so once you have pain for 5, 10, 20 years, it's not just the sensation anymore. It's all of the consequences of living with the pain that you're working to heal as well.
Wouldn't you say, Melissa, that it's like driving the car? Once you know how to do it, you just do it. And that's the same with somatic pain, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you get better, your body gets better and better. It's one of the interesting things about pain, in that our bodies are naturally designed to amplify pain signals, both from the nerves all the way up to the spinal cord. The spinal cord is naturally designed to amplify that signal, and the brain is naturally designed to pay close attention to that signal and amp it up. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of times whenever I've talked with patients, they blame themselves sometimes they blame themselves for developing pain, like I did something wrong. And actually, the body did everything right.
Good.
That's right. The body did everything right, and that's what you're supposed to have.
Yes, and it created a strong memory, a strong pain, sensory emotional memory that was so well created that it's hard to extinguish over time.
So what we're talking about is the counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive. And that's really where the hard part comes. That's where we have to be patient and understand pain. Like it reminds me of Mosley's book, Explain Pain. Like we have to explain pain, and the more people understand the pain and the neurons firing together, it helps them. The knowledge helps them. And then, I think what Rose's work is so amazing is that it helps their unconscious mind connect to their conscious mind, so they can dive into that emotional part, which you're saying is so important. And that's where Sarno rose up and said, hey, the emotional mind is important. The conscious eye, he talked about the the conscious eye,
Mm.
like the third eye. Anyway, it's just so interesting to draw the worlds together, because all people are they're going to heal better
Mhm.
with the both worlds together, not just one or the other.
Absolutely. And one of the other things I've discovered over the years, it's a group from Finland called Lauri Numina. They published it, and I can send you this article to where you can share with people who we can share these papers. There are also body maps of emotions where people tend to feel their emotions.
Yes.
So, and I'm sure both of you are familiar with
Well,
this.
that's where ISTDP
That's
comes in.
ISTDP.
Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful. And so there are even papers showing, yes, there's body maps. You feel anger in your fists and your neck
That's
and
right.
your head,
Yes.
and anxiety in your chest.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you join it up so that the gut feeling comes out. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
so
that's why attachment theory fits in so well with this, because it's a that's the other thing I wanted you to mention is about pre-verbal, because in your article that I was reading, it's so much of this has happened in the pre-verbal part of our lives, and then we don't have a way of actually articulating it. So that's another thing, that it's
Yes.
actually learnt in the background, like driving the car. You have your lessons, and then it's all in the background, and it just is set up for us, isn't it?
Yeah. Whenever there are people with early childhood experience of pain, for instance, people who were born prematurely, but also it could be physical pain, it could be emotional pain, which many, many, many people have. There's no shame in having these early experiences. Those experiences, it's called sensitized. They strengthen pathways in the brain, in the subcortical emotional parts of the brain, that then become responsible for the chronic pain maintenance. So in a sense, if you've had these very, very early life experiences, it makes those parts of the brain very good at learning more emotional experiences. It makes them more efficient, to where whenever you get to the point where you start to develop pain, those pathways have already been strengthened. And so it's much easier to make a strong emotional memory, and to transition from subacute pain to chronic pain whenever you have that basis. One of the things.
So, okay, so what you're actually saying is that I have an injury, for example, and that injury then should heal within about, I don't know, a broken bone. So 6 weeks.
Mhm.
So the pain that I had from the broken bone is then reinforced to the earlier pain. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that can
Yeah. Can you
happen.
draw that out a little bit more? Because you've actually got some of that work is being done by you and your colleagues, which is really quite interesting, because sometimes the unhealthy emotional experience is tied then into that, isn't it? Like the frustration about not being healed. Yes?
Absolutely.
So then the anger towards yourself. Can you sort of draw on that a little bit more?
Sure.
So that the chronic pain becomes, it's sort of like self-perpetuating, isn't it?
So and one of the ways to think about this is that we all have very early life templates, emotional templates about why things happen to us. In CBT, this is called a core belief.
Yeah.
So if you ever go to CBT or you look at CBT resources, at the very, very bottom of it, whenever you look at all of the thoughts that are unhelpful or problematic, at the very, very core are these early thoughts that were often created in childhood. Maybe we heard them, maybe we thought them to ourselves. And depending on the level of development, they can be very simple thoughts about how lovable you are, how worthy you are. And these are emotional templates that get built on as we have experiences throughout our life. Whenever they feel painful, even emotionally painful, they reinforce those early beliefs. And what I find a lot of times with people with chronic pain is that the chronic pain is overlaid onto those early beliefs. Even still, if I had not, if I had done something more, if I were more lovable, if I were if I were more worthy, or if I were doing something better, this wouldn't have happened to me. So there are often these core beliefs, these same core beliefs that feed into the chronic pain experience. And that's why
they make it, don't they?
Yeah, and that's why it's whenever I'm talking with someone with chronic pain, and I've had it too myself, it's very tender, that it's not just the physical sensations. There's so much of a history of suffering that we're interacting with too.
Yes.
Wow.
And the child, the inner child, we're interacting with the inner child at the same time. And it's just, you really have to have respect for it. And whenever you feel the pain in your own body, it's also important to have that respect for the amount of
They brought up a
suffering.
great point, because people, they're disconnected. They don't like it. They want it. They want it to be gone. They're angry, and so then there comes the disconnect, and there comes the greater neuron wire together, fire together, because they're perpetuating the disconnection, as opposed to what you just said. Like, you just say the word respect. Like, you need to have respect. So tell us some more about that, because that's what
I'd like to bring in some of my own experience here, because I
lovely.
What happened? You were working on a scientist. You were working with science, and you had some chronic pain. Would you share what happened?
Yeah. I developed, while I was in doing my postdoc, I developed chronic pain in my back, and then it spread to my pelvis, and it had neuropathic components. It would like go in waves up my spine. Even as a pain scientist, where I knew, I specialize in chronic pain mechanisms from, like the hard science aspect, and I know more than a lot of people about this, it didn't make sense to me. And although it wasn't apparent at the time, whenever I look back, what I had done to myself over years is I had shut my body down at every opportunity whenever it didn't do what I wanted mentally for it to do. I shut my body down. I punished it. I tried to quiet down with drugs or alcohol, like medications or alcohol. I didn't want to hear anything my body had to say. And at a point, it got to the level where the only way my body could talk to me in a way that I could hear was through pain.
Wow.
Yeah. And it
had to yell at me.
Wow.
It had to put me down on my back for me to even listen or consider listening to what my body needed.
Wow.
And so I understand the desire to shut the body up and to be angry at it. And at the same time, there's it's all of these signals, the pain, the emotion that comes up, it's actually protective, because it's saying, there's something you're doing right now that is not good for me. Either some life choice, either some pattern that is playing out, either a relationship that I was in at the time. There was some pattern that was no longer sustainable, and my body couldn't keep it up. And so it knocked me on my butt. And I had no choice other than to start making changes and to listen to it, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to go on functioning.
Wow.
So I have so much empathy for people at all stages of this. And I understand the anger, and, but at the same time, there's a voice, and I think both of you can speak to this much better, but there's a voice in each of us where the body is asking us to pay attention and to protect it. And it's trying to teach us how to protect it.
Yeah. Can you share what you did to move yourself on that journey?
I got out of science.
So you changed your career. You made a career change.
I made a huge career change that was an identity change because I'd always thought that that's who I would be. So I gave up who I thought I was supposed to be. I stopped being in relationships where they were emotionally and physically toxic to me. I changed how I ate. I started, I learned how to meditate as a way to listen to my body. And it's been a really long path because I'm still learning. But I realized that I dissociated myself a lot from my body because I was in my mind so much. I just shut off a level of awareness of my body, and the pain was the only sensation it could communicate with me through. And so I started to practice listening to other sensations.
Look what the world has given us. Hey, and now we've got you in the world speaking this truth. But you needed that pain to get there. Isn't it amazing?
Absolutely.
It really
Thank
is
you
amazing.
for saying that.
Wow. So you developed a relationship with your pain that was healthy. Can you talk a little bit about that, if you wouldn't mind sharing more? Because it's beautiful. It's a language that Rose and I, speak to each other and to clients, and we want to help them because it is a language that you have to speak to yourself. And can you share how you spoke to Melissa, or to little Melissa?
Oh, yeah. So I realized my inner child was my body. That was a big realization for me, which meant that everything I put in my body, everything I ate, everything I did was me telling my body whether I was loving it or whether I was not like that was, in a sense, how I take care of my physical body is how I'm taking care of my inner child. And in a sense, it gave me a chance to realize I could be my own parent. This is a long journey this has been. But in a sense, throughout my whole life, I had not been able to, I had internalized this, a lot of things that weren't mine. And it was a decision where I decided, if my body is my inner child, I need to take care of my body as well as possible and slowly teach it over time. I'm now the parent. If I could go back and do everything, this is how I would treat you. And slowly, I started to have emotions come up, really, really, really deep, old emotions from a lot of different parts of my life to be witnessed. And I honestly learned that I've been very interested in how to process really deep, heavy emotions. And so one of the things I learned that I could do is whenever a really, really deep emotion comes up, it doesn't need to be solved. It doesn't need to be figured out or explained. It just wants to be witnessed. As
That's
fully
a key word, ladies and gentlemen. So
Witnessed, observe,
seen, because before I shut it down, I repressed it.
Yeah. You don't have to tell your mother that she was a rotten mother. You have to witness to yourself that you went through a difficult time. So this witnessing is not about actually getting angry with the world or whatever, but witnessing your own pain, witnessing that, and witnessing that you actually have come out the other side of whatever it was that started you off. I just, it's a word that isn't used often, and it's so, because you've said it, I think it's an important thing for people to recognize, because they'll often think, well, I've got to verbalize, I've got to discharge, but it's actually what you're talking about is witnessing to that inner person, to that inner child in you, isn't it? That your life was worthwhile. Yeah.
And it just, whether I can't change what happened, I can't change how I felt, but I can acknowledge that I felt that way. And now, from my perspective, just give it space. And what I realize whenever I do that is the emotion moves through and then it goes away.
Exactly.
It doesn't
It
stay.
becomes integrated virtually, doesn't it? that emotion, that feeling becomes integrated and becomes part of our history rather than a sore point.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the other part that I recognized that it took me a while to learn how to do this. As I would develop a dual sort of like I'd feel it come up in me and let it sort of peak. And then I'd also imagine viewing myself at the same point and shining love on it. And that
Beautiful.
makes it go through really quick to where I can move through very, very, very heavy.
Do you mind saying that again? I want to hear that again, please, if you
I want
don't
to hear
mind.
it again. Yeah.
No, I want to hear it again because this was it's beautiful how you figured this out. And, love heals. Like I sent you the movie, I sent you the link,
Yeah.
and you'll see that. But you figured this out, climbing out of this deep hole. You figured out something. And so I'd love to just share that again, what you did.
Yeah. So letting the emotions rise up, giving them space to rise up, and letting them get to a point where it feels raw, like not cutting it off short, letting it fully express itself. And not for a long time, like maybe for half a minute even, like whatever you can tolerate. But like it doesn't have to be long in my experience. And then I'm feeling it in my body and I'm not putting up resistance, I'm just feeling it. I'm not trying to change it. I then imagine at the same time viewing myself feeling this and in a sense like my inner parent viewing my child feeling the pain and then just sort of feeling love. Like
Hmm.
it's so beautiful that you're feeling this. It's so beautiful that you made it through that. It's so beautiful that you were trying to protect yourself. It's so beautiful that you were angry because you knew something that was true to you is being violated.
Yeah. You've been hurt. Yeah.
And I breathe really deeply through it. And I just keep on breathing deeply until the emotional wave passes. And that has it took a while to learn that, and every time I do it, it becomes easier.
Because I was going to say, like, how scary is that? How dark is that? How unfamiliar, how uncomfortable, how so strange is that? And like you just said, you knew it was the road that you needed to take, or at least it was the opposite of what you were doing. So, it made sense to just be with it and be they say like to come out of you came out of your comfort zone. And there's a saying, like I heard this from people who went to India who healed from cancer, this one woman, that if it feels bad or wrong, that's it. Like regarding pain, like it felt uncomfortable, what may be where I need to go into the resistance, which is a book written by Dr. Abbas, Alan Abbas, going into the resistance, right? Reaching into the resistance. And that's what you did, Melissa. You reached into this dark place of discomfort where there's a place of love. It's like you found the golden, pot.
And also I noticed that there were some times whenever the pain would come on and the emotions would be much stronger than the sensations.
That's
So
the place that people want to bolt.
Can you draw this out a little bit more?
yeah, so I would start to feel insert negative emotion here, grief, sadness, and then I'd start to feel sensations come up in my body, sometimes in my hips, especially at a certain point in my hips, my legs. It'd be like an aching, from a scientist perspective, it would like I was watching, I was observing the whole thing as it happened. And sort of a diffuse aching that would spread. And then I realized that the emotion and the sensation were coming together. They were connected. And sometimes this would last just for a little bit of time. Sometimes it would last for hours. Sometimes it would last for days. And whenever that started to happen, I realized I'm dealing with emotions here, embodied emotions, and emotions are sensory and sensations are emotional, and it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
And
In other words, pain is an emotion.
pain is an emotion that brings our attention to a part of the body where the emotion could be stored. And I think that there's some significance in terms of where on the body the emotion is stored that I don't totally understand, but I also think it's unique for everyone. It must be. But a lot of my pain was in my abdomen. I'd feel lots of nausea. For the nausea, I learned the Chinese acupressure point method, which was really that was helpful. But also during those times, whenever I'd realize, oh, there's an emotion here that just needs to be felt, I learned that the most effective thing to do was to get in bed, to curl up in a pillow, and to surrender to it.
Wow.
And that was
Lovely.
really hard to learn.
Yeah.
And just to let it move through my body. And what I learned is I wouldn't know how long it would last, but I was giving it space to move through, and it was always just enough that my body could handle it and my nervous system could handle it. It was never more than I could handle. So it's almost like there was my body knew, okay, you can take this much. It's intense, I know, but you can take it. And it would move through and then it would resolve. And that pain wouldn't come back again.
Yeah.
Or maybe there'd be another emotion sensation combination that would come up, but it wouldn't be the same thing. So what I felt was that by feeling it, that whatever memory that was coming up was now gone. It was taken care of.
Yeah.
And now it was just what's next.
Yeah.
And I had a big waiting room.
Could I mention now that what Melissa has told us about is the observing capacity in us that she'd garnered to actually see what was going on. And that's another form of actually, how would you put it? Self-discovery, watching what's going on and allowing that feeling to come up and watching it pass through. It's just so lovely the way you've described it all. So
thank you.
You can see, ladies and gentlemen, that she's got years and years of background and understanding from a scientist's point of view and from a psychologist's point of view, that both of these things come together. And when we go to the GP or to the doctor, he hasn't got that background. So in a way, he needs to be forgiven as well, doesn't he? Because he's got no clue what he's dealing with. All he knows is what he learned at university and what personal ongoing education he took. And if he didn't have that marrying of what's going on, when you tell me that you've been to 10 doctors, I can understand why, because the doctor doesn't have the understanding that Melissa's got. And when Melissa had her own pain, because of her medical background and because of her science background, she was able to integrate it. But she did that by observing it. And in observing it, she was able to actually meditate, I suppose you might put it, or become mindful of what was happening. And many, many of you out there have sort of said, this won't work. This won't work. This is too much. I can't do this. It should happen in 5 minutes. But as Melissa has said, this took how long
Oh my
for
gosh,
you to get
years.
there?
Years.
Yeah.
And
she's got all the knowledge. So
but
the yous and me's of this.
But also, I want to really emphasize that if I did not have the lived experience, it wouldn't have. I'm thankful.
Yeah.
I know it sounds weird, but I'm very thankful because it's helped me understand people with pain so much more and to really understand on a visceral level that whenever I talk to
Deeply.
someone with pain, their perspective of what's happening in their body is so much more important than any test result or anything a doctor could say. You live in your body. You're the expert. You really are. I 1000%, if someone has an intuition about what's going on with them that disagrees with the doctor, I believe them every time. Like you live in your body, you know it better than anyone else. Which is also why listening to it is so important, and it's not something that we're taught.
No.
No, no. Yeah. So tell us what you do nowadays.
Nowadays, I've developed a app that is designed to help bring different types of pain neuroscience education and mind body approaches and some CBT education all together in a way that would help an individual figure out what they might need at that moment. It's currently only available in the US, but I do want to, it's called AvoHealth, but I also want to emphasize that these are all strategies that dovetail into this mind-body approach of every single person has like a unique path of what will help them best. And it'll probably be a combination of things. It's not just one thing. It might be a little bit of, practicing being embodied and being comfortable with that. It might be some anxiety reduction. It might be exploration and just seeking out new positive emotional experiences. And I think because everyone's pain journey is so unique, your solution will be unique as well. And so I'm very interested in understanding what people need right now to heal the most. And especially over the past couple of years, I feel like more than ever, one of the most useful tools for people who are still living with pain is becoming more comfortable with processing negative emotions. I really feel like this is something that, whenever you look at the mind-body approach, there are sort of superficial ways of dealing with it. Just for instance, hearing that the brain has a role. For instance, someone can read a Sarna book, it just clicks, their pain is gone. That's perfect for them. But maybe in a few years, pain comes back. Or maybe someone has a different type of pain that requires a little bit deeper of an approach. So something I don't hear a lot discussed is the need for different depths of mind-body approaches, because the deeper you go, the more important the emotions are. And it depends on every person as to which sort of puzzle pieces are the best for you. But I really, especially whenever for people that I've interacted with who are seasoned mind body experts, like you've read the books, you know the importance of the brain and the body working together. The importance of emotional processing becomes really important. And
And this is for some people, this is so foreign. They're so far disconnected from, like, because we talk about applying and implementing, because they know it up here, like you said, and it's not easy. And I always say, like, why is it hard for us to connect to our emotions? Why does it? Of course, we didn't see it growing up, but then now we're adults and we can learn anything, and it's difficult.
It's difficult. And I mean, although men have this issue as well, I think as a society, we are taught to suppress our emotions at every turn. But I know as a woman, I've always had very strong emotions, positive and negative. And throughout my life, I felt like I was punished for having those. Oh, you're too emotional. Stop being so emotional. Like that itself was used to invalidate whatever I was feeling, and it was weaponized. So in a sense, I think a lot of women especially have this experience of our natural emotions being weaponized against us. Another thing that comes into play is the medical model, where in order to be taken seriously, and I'm going to speak very frankly here, and this is from me too, we teach ourselves the language of doctors in order to be taken seriously by them.
Mm.
And, doctors are sort of seen as these gatekeepers, to the point where, if you take medication, you can't even make a change in medication without this approval of this person who doesn't live with you, who doesn't know with you. Maybe you see him every 3 months for maybe 10 minutes, he or she. So there's this weird gatekeeper effect, but also the whole process, because it becomes so disempowering, it's traumatizing by itself. And in that sense, because many people have experiences with doctors who have not believed them or have gaslit them or have told them that their bodies were broken or faulty or unsavable, unsalvageable, this is a metaphor, but it's almost like adopting the language of your abuser.
It's not almost a metaphor, it's true.
I'm trying to,
we talk about this often, about
It's not,
trying not to bash the medical community, and you said to me when we were doing some prep yesterday, you said it to me, Melissa, it's another climb, another mountain, another self-limiting belief that we have to break through, because the doctor said this, the doctor said this, the doctor said this, the doctor said this. So what you're saying is helping our.
But in health, we often say, well, the doctor sees himself as God. But in actual fact, the doctor doesn't need to see himself as God, because the patient does it for them in a way. Yeah. So, it sort of stops. If the doctor said I should do this, well, that's what I'm going to do.
And I think it's important to be realistic about the amount of training that a doctor receives about pain. So there was a study done in 2011. I think Michael Schachter was a co-author of this, but I can also give you guys this paper reference.
I think we've heard these facts about how little they learn about.
Yeah, 4 to 11 average in North America, medical schools have 4 to 11 hours of education on pain, and it's mostly normal nociceptive pain and how to prescribe opioids following surgery.
Wow.
Unless the doctor seeks some sort of training outside of that, they will not know more.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. Well,
even then, they still don't know as much as a chronic pain scientist knows. So they don't keep up on the literature, and the literature is really gnarly. But even still, from a perspective of someone who did know the literature, it wasn't like having the lived experience was the thing that I feel has made me understand pain the most.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we had the anesthetic, the recovery room nurse on, who's ISTDP trained, and she says to the patient, well, what other problems have you got? And the anaesthetist will come out and say, oh, what's happened to my patient? And she'll say, oh, they've gone back to the ward, because all she did was she asked what else was going on for them.
So they didn't need any pain medication.
They didn't need pain medication then. Yeah.
Need a human,
on an earlier broadcast.
Human who listens.
Sorry?
Oh, just a compassionate human who's listening.
And
yes, or who knows how to ask the right questions.
And the beauty of it is that there are a lot of nurses that we meet. Like I've met, like there's an organization in America, about pain. So I think nurses, midwives, I think it's changing. The world's changing little by little. Rose being a midwife and nurses becoming, I think it's changing slowly. And again, that's our goal, is to keep educating people. And that's where we get to meet amazing doctors that have turned the page. We're still diagnosing, medically unexplained symptoms and still giving medicine, but they're open, and receptive, like the guys in the PBDA and the doctors. And so I always like to say that we like to integrate medicine and mind body, because you can have chemo, and one of our clients called it chemo ecstasy. It all depends on, it's all mindset. And just going back to this particular patient, I'm thinking about a client, and she was on our show. She healed cancer, and she talked a lot about her little child. Now, she happens to want, like, drinking Coke and smoking marijuana. It doesn't matter, as long as you're connected to your inner child. It doesn't matter if you're eating good or bad, or it's this connection, it's this relationship, this surrender, this acceptance. This, rather than right or wrong, it's more this relationship that needs to be healthy, rather than, the right things to eat or the wrong things to eat, or the negative emotions. Like Rose actually taught me very early on, emotions are not negative or positive, because we can use any emotion to serve us or to hurt us. So
but our caregivers call it negative and positive, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So
it's something I also want to just, this sort of dovetails to what you've said, is everyone's inner child will need something different, because everyone's body needs something different. And often, like, if you're craving, fat or something, it might mean like you need some sort of nutrients there.
Yeah.
So definitely, I agree, not judging what your body is asking for, even if your body is asking you for a little bit of dissociation for right now. Like, sugar is a great way to
it's
dissociate.
where you need to go.
Yeah.
And you see, if we can use that example of actually then having a safe place to negotiate those feared emotions, and that's why the fear is so important, to link that to the pain, because the fear about your feelings is just as acute as the somatic pain that you've got in your body. Your emotions, your feelings of love, anger, grief, sadness, joy, etc., they're fearful for you because, as Melissa said, they weren't validated earlier on. They were considered positive or negative. Be happy that Aunt Mary has come to visit you, although Aunt Mary might have, jabbed you in some other way. But you've got to pretend that you're happy that she's shown up. Whereas, that's going against your psyche, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you've got to pretend for other people.
Yeah, and we're taught that's loving behavior, to pretend.
Yes.
Something else that I realized that was helpful is whenever I created like an indulgent self ritual whenever I was going into some negative emotional state, like I was just feeling something coming up. What would I do after? And I had a plan for that, and that I knew that even if in the next hour or two, or even the next day, I'm going to be dealing with this, I have a plan of how I'm going to take care of myself after, and I'm going to treat myself good.
Wow.
So I'd always know that it would turn out well. So I'd have a playlist. I would have snacks on hand. I'd have, like, my super comfy pajamas. Like, I had a ritual.
Beautiful.
And so I'd always know that it would turn out great, because I'd end up in my comfy clothes on the couch, listening to music, eating my favorite snack. That's how it would end.
And you were bringing safety to a perceived threat. And that's the pain reprocessing therapy, which we talked about. You really understood how to bring safety through the love, through the surrender, through the self-soothing. You really, really, without really talking to me or Rose at all, you are doing you're solving, you're creating recovery.
That actually came from my knowledge of memory reconsolidation therapy.
Yes,
well, it's not
good.
really therapy, but
talk about that, because that's an important thing that you've actually brought together, this sense of safety.
I never heard of that memory.
After I've dealt with Aunt Mary, I'll be able to hop into my PJs
and
listen to some Bach music or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
So memory reconsolidation is a fundamental. This is one of the reasons why I'm so optimistic about chronic pain as an emotional memory, because emotional memories, any emotional memory, can be reshaped through a process that's been described over the course of 20 years.
Beautiful.
And this is primarily animal research that was then converted into human research, like maybe 2011 or so afterward. And it hasn't been done really well, but I think it's because clinicians who tried to apply this haven't understood the science as as well as they could. This is the principle. Whenever you have an emotional memory come up, about an hour after it comes up, if you really let it build up, that's like the peak of its expression in your brain. The memory network in your brain that's responsible for that is at its maximum strength. And over the next 2 to 3 to 4 hours, let's say 3 to 4 hours, that memory web is still very active, and then it'll go quiet again. During that period of time, that 3 to 4 hour window period, that memory is itself malleable. You can make it weaker, you can make it stronger.
Wow.
If you start to perseverate and catastrophize, you can pick up the fear, you can make that memory trace even stronger and make it even more durable.
Wow.
Or you can do something as simple as deep breathing for the next 2 to 3 hours. And as long as you're more relaxed than you were whenever you began, that memory will be reconsolidated in a weaker, less fearful state. So
Wow.
it's like clockwork. You have this window. Anytime these emotions come up, you can, and one of the things that really makes this especially effective is if you introduce some information about an hour into it, or even after that, that contradicts your beliefs. And this is where compassion or love superimposed over the fear, that's the contradiction, because your brain pays attention to contradictions. It loves contradictions because that's learning something new. So this is also why, for instance, if you wanted an example of research, Dr. Peter O'Sullivan's work, he's in Australia. He often does this with people who come into his clinic the first time they come in, where he works with them to find what sort of beliefs they have about their movements. And after, becoming comfortable with each other, he helps them violate their expectations, and they realize they can move in ways that they didn't know. And that is a way of changing the very structure of that memory. So there is no memory, according to science, like everything I know about science, there's no reason why these emotional memories related to pain can't be completely rewritten. And you have an opportunity to rewrite it every time it comes up. And even if it's just reducing the volume through something as simple as deep breathing, even though deep breathing, I know it's still the most quick and effective way to increase
It is.
parasympathetic tone.
Yeah.
Period. Xanax or some sort of, muscle relaxer has nothing on deep breathing in terms of
True.
it works immediately.
Yeah.
It doesn't have like a weird, rebound period with weird side effects. So
Look,
even just
could
deep
you?
breathing
Yeah.
is
Okay.
enough.
Please talk to us as a scientist about what deep breathing does, because the diaphragm goes up and down. What happens then? Does the neocortex come online and the amygdala quieten down? What physically happens to people so that they can value deep breathing? Because people devalue it all the time. And as clinicians, that's one of our primary things, to ask the person to breathe through it. So
it's a surprisingly complex answer, because what it is it's changing the tone of your entire nervous system. It can happen whenever you start deep breathing. Within 3 to 5 seconds, you'll start to see a change in the overall tone of the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's measured by a certain pattern of just to say it very broadly in a way most people will understand, there's a certain cardiac pattern that will start to change within a few seconds. And what that does is it shifts how your entire nervous system communicates from that moment, and it reduces the amount of sympathetic tone because it's increasing the parasympathetic tone.
Wow.
They both can't be increased at the same time. When one increases, the other has to reduce. If you want to maximize that, keep eye contact with someone you trust who's relaxed, touch, physical soft touch. Those are ways to sort of, if you want to bring the sort of the polyvagal view of it, cues of safety, visual cues of safety will also make that work even quicker. But even just deep breathing really quickly shifts the state of your nervous system, in that if you deep breathe for even just 5 minutes, there is no way you can maintain the same level of sympathetic arousal and therefore fear. It's just not physiologically possible.
Wow.
It's just not possible. Wow. And so that's why, and I understand the whenever I first was reading about it, it almost felt patronizing, like, oh yeah, just breathe deeply, sure, that'll help. And then I started reading about the science, and it was legit. And compared to any type of medication, it's much more effective and much more quick. But it's also cheap, it's free. And for instance, during this 3 to 4 hour window, something as simple as that, wherever you are, if you're at your in-laws' house, if you're at home in bed, wherever you are, it's something that you can do to make sure that memory window closes more relaxed than you began.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and that's another thing I want to make sure that's clear. In neuroscience, we've seen lots of brain changes in people with different types of chronic pain. And all that means is that the brain has adapted to a chronic pain state. It can always adapt back. There's also evidence that these changes can be reversed. Both the functional changes and the anatomical changes can be reversed. And it just depends on what kind of learning you're feeding yourself, what kind of information you're feeding yourself, what kind of experiences you're choosing.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean going out and doing more. It can just be in your body. How do you want to experience your body differently right now? That's enough.
I know Rose has a client, but we got to have a part 2. Will you come back for part 2?
Absolutely. It would be my pleasure.
This is so interesting,
Fantastic.
so fascinating. So, Rose, you want to round us up, say goodbye?
Yeah. Melissa, thank you so much. The whole notion that fear is driving us instead of compassion needs to, how would I put it? Needs to be observed, I suppose, is the best way of putting it. The fear is there, but the compassion is available. The safety is available once we have that mindset. And could I just use Melissa's explanation of the breath? The breath is the most important thing. I just think of that newborn baby when it's held up and it inhales and it gets breath and it gets life, independent life. And that independent life is ours all the time with our breath.
Beautiful.
So thank you, Melissa. And thank you, Tova. And good night, Melissa.
Yes.
Tova, should I say?
Yes.
And good night.
Good night, everybody. And Melissa, we'll see you again.
Okay, it's a deal.
All the best.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Okay.